All right, Tracy. Very enlightening response on the first question. But I have here a question. This came from some junior leaders that I worked with, and they're asking how can aspiring leaders like them use Six Sigma to create measurable impact in their careers, especially in the industry that we work on.
Thank you for the question. And the way I want to approach the response to this question, measurable impact, of course, measurable impact. And we talked a minute ago about data-driven decisions.
Right.
But where this all begins is by asking the right questions. And I want to talk about three different kinds of questions or three different sets of questions that an aspiring leader should have the confidence to ask in a process improvement setting. The first of these three is formulating a problem statement. If someone comes to you or to the manager or to somebody and says, "We have a problem," it is possible to overreact, right? It's possible to overreact to data, like we talked about with confidence intervals. But it's also possible to overreact when someone says, "We have a problem," and the manager says, "Jump into action. We need to solve this problem. We need to squash this problem. Our customer has expressed that there's a problem." It's important to pause. I mean, unless there's some, I understand sometimes that there's significant, urgent, correction is required. But when we have the time, it's very important to ask questions to understand the problem, to understand the magnitude of the problem. And the format that I like to recommend and use myself in improvement workshops is 5W, 2H problem statement. 5Ws being who, what, when, where, why. We all learned them in our youth as the reporter's questions: who, what, when, where, why. And then 2H is how and how often, usually how often. And the way that these work, and I'll try to keep this brief, Raleigh, the way that these work is by asking the question, first of all, what is the gap? If someone expresses a problem, like someone in a city may come to the city council and say, "It takes too long to get a fence permit, or it takes too long to get a building permit." It's possible to jump right in and say, "We need to shorten the permitting time," right?
Mm.
They're complaining. But if we just pause for a second and say, "Okay, what is the gap?" That's the first W question. What's the gap between where we are today and where we need to be, right? We need to be here. We need it to only take a certain amount of time. Where are we today? Let's look at the data, not just a story, not just an anecdote, but find out, is there really a gap? And if so, what is that gap? Now, what this gives us, suppose we want to issue a fence permit in 3 days, and right now it's taking 5 days. There's a gap there.
Right.
And it's also, it provides a baseline saying, okay, if it's truly 5 days on average today, and we make some improvements, we should be able to see that number creep closer toward the goal and verify that there has been an improvement and not just say later, "Oh, yeah, I think things are better now," right? We want to be able to prove it. So having data helps us to prove the current situation and prove that we've made improvements. So the first W question, and each of them, it doesn't take as long as this one to explain, is what is the gap? It's also possible that the gap might not be real, right? There might just be a perception. If the goal is really 3 days and we go and look at the last 100 permits that we issued and found out it really is only taking 3 days on average, somebody just had one exceptional experience that took them longer, it doesn't mean we have a process problem necessarily. It could mean that there was a special circumstance. And that's different than, a manager saying, "We need to fix this process because it's not working." Let's look at the data and understand where the gap is. The next few W questions before we get to why, we've asked what is the gap. It's who, when, and where. Let's ask who. Who really is being impacted by this? It's possible to overgeneralize the customer, right? But there are many different types of customers, many different customer groups and customer segments. And let's look at the data and see which customer segment is being mostly affected. That way, that can help sharpen our investigation into where improvements are needed. The when and the where question I leave to you how to use. It could be when during the process, or when during the year, or when during the cycle, when during a day. But at least consider when so we can sharpen, again, our investigative focus. And where could be a geographic where, where location-wise, but it could also mean where in the process flowchart is the problem really happening. The question why, in the case of developing a problem statement, is not really why is this happening, right? Because if we knew why it was happening, we would already be on our way to fixing it. The
Right.
why in this case is why does it matter? Why is it important? Right? We're answering the question, so what? If this happened 15 times last year, is that 15 times out of 10,000? Might not be the most significant thing that we have to work on. But if it was 15 out of 30, that's a bad rate. That's a bad failure rate. The how often question is very helpful, and I'll talk about this again in a second. How often does this problem really arise? Right? Is it happening every single day? Okay, that's bad, right? We want to try to prevent that. So let's look at the data and see how often we actually experience this. If it happens once in a while, sure, let's take a look when we have time. If it's rare that this really happens, it's just one vocal person complained that this was a big deal, again, it might not deserve our immediate attention. And the last one, the how question, is how do we know? How do we know that this is a problem? What is our evidence, right? What proof do we have that this is really a problem? Is it just a loud voice? Is it just, one recent situation? Or do we actually have evidence or proof? So that's the first thing of three that I wanted to mention, Raleigh. Does that sound okay?
Right. And Tracy, I can't help but ask this one. It's very interesting based on your answer earlier. You said there's a gap. So let's say I collected data. What happened in the past, let's say last 6 months, and what's happening now. Uh,
Mhm.
I think this is where even during the define phase of the DMAIC process, we can actually apply like t-test whether the gap is significant or what or any other hypothesis test so that we know, as you mentioned, that the gap is significant or not, right, Tracy?
That's very insightful, Raleigh. The concept, the tool, the statistical process control charts, control charting, is
Hmm.
often taught at the end. It's often
At the
taught
end,
late in a Six Sigma curriculum because it starts with C, and that's the control
right?
phase, right? But really, it needs to be used much earlier because then you can see those trends. It's best to have those SPC charts or those control charts in place already because they are the voice of the process.
Actually, Tracy, you
So
may
let me go
not.
into the second. I'm
Uh,
sorry.
I I was about to say you may not remember this, but I actually got that from you when we. You remember when I was in data, and then you were there. We were talking over lunch, and I actually asked you that question, and you said yes, you can do that. I got that from
It
you.
is. It is. We don't have to put our, blinkers on. We can use these tools
Yeah,
whenever they are appropriate. Right.
exactly, exactly.
So the second item of three, I'm going to refer to the fishbone,
Hmm.
diagram of the fishbone process, the root cause investigation through fishbone, which is really a channeled idea generation exercise. And I'm not going to go through, in great detail. I just want to talk about the way to ask the right fishbone question because a fishbone chart, with its major bones and some of the common um, general fishbone labels include, methods, machines, metrics, our materials that we use, the working environment, the staff or the people issues. If those are the general, and you don't have to use those bone labels, those channel labels, but if you do, a good way to do this, and let's use the context of late deliveries. Say the problem is late deliveries.
Hmm.
A good way to ask the question is, what is it about our category that leads to problem, right? So what is it about our materials that leads to late deliveries? Okay, well, maybe our materials are not readable. Maybe our website is not clear, or maybe the intake form that we use, maybe the shipping forms and shipping labels that we use are not clear. So the materials that we actually use, maybe our packaging material, it gets easily fractured. So then you exhaust that materials category and then reframe the question again. What is it about our machines, next category, that leads to late deliveries? And you would start to say, well, our lift trucks or our pickers or our actual vehicles, our gates are not anything with an on-off switch, right? So whatever the labels are going to be, ask the question to the subject matter experts, the operators, the stakeholders. What is it about our, category metrics that leads to late deliveries. We may have conflicting metrics. So go through all those categories. I just wanted to frame it in that way. And that is uh, repetitive and predictable. And if it's predictable enough, then people start coming to the session with the answer already in mind because they know what question you're going to ask.
Right.
So that was number two. Raleigh, I know you're a fan of the fishbone process as well.
Yeah, and that's very clear. It's a good tip, Tracy, because every time I conduct workshops on the fishbone, people always ask how to do that. And since it's very common to practitioners like us, I seldom overlook that kind of approach in doing the fishbone. Thank you so much for that, Terry. It's a good reminder for even for practitioners. Uh,
Sure. The third and final set of questions that I want to ask are known as the failure modes and effects analysis questions, the
oh,
FMEA
yeah,
questions. Right.
definitely.
And yeah, and so they are about the frequency of occurrence, the severity of the problem, and the detectability of that issue. And this will just take a second, but this is the most important thing. This is the most important thing when you say a aspiring or a new or a young quality professional making a positive impact, is when somebody expresses that there is a problem or when we've started to identify the cause of that problem. You've got to ask these three questions. You have to ask these three questions. One, how often does it happen? Right? And we talked about that in the formulation of a problem statement. This is very important because the range of answers will help you prioritize this matter for intervention. Does it happen rarely, right? A low score, a low frequency, low likelihood of occurrence. Does it happen sometimes, intermittently, every few days or every so often? It depends on the volume of your transactions. Or does it happen all the time? Highly frequent, high likelihood of this problem occurring. That's an important sorting variable. So the first question of these three in this third category, the FMEA questions, is how often does this happen, really? Let's be honest. And the second is severity. How bad is it when it does happen? When this problem does happen, is it just a nuisance? I wish it hadn't happened. Let's just correct it. Is it just a temporary, annoyance? Or is it more serious, perhaps major, and it causes a delay in our work? Or the worst case is it a catastrophe? Does it completely derail our process? Those are the words that I use: nuisance, delay, or derail. So you might have problems that happen all the time, very frequent, high frequency, but low severity. Okay, I wish that it didn't happen. Let's see if we can find a way to make this happen less often. It's not that big of a problem. You may have others that happen infrequently, but are significant, right? Very, very serious problem. And this will help you prioritize the problems. The third one, though, the third element of this FMEA tool is detectability. When this problem arises, when this cause occurs, how quickly do we learn that it has happened? Do we know immediately? That would be a low score, low detectability score. But yes, we know instantly. We see it. It's right there. It's visual management. I can see that this problem has happened. Therefore, I have a chance to correct it, stop it from getting worse. Or does it happen? Do we detect it later after it has happened? We still catch it internally, but not immediately, right? That would be the middle score. Or the worst case is we didn't even know about it. It arrived, the problem happened, it got by us completely, it made it all the way to our customer, and they notified us that we have a problem. That's the worst case. So ask those three questions. How bad is the problem when it happens? How often does it occur? And how easily detectable is it? You ask those questions, you have a much better chance of prioritizing and your problems for investigation and improvement.
Nice. So imagine if you are, let's say, in the medical or airline industry. So the severity might be life-threatening, right, Tracy? So
It could
this
definitely be,
this
yes.
tool will be very important.